Okay, y'all. We are gathered here today to talk about The Mystery Writer by Solari Gentile. I have a handful of videos I have to film today, so I thought, why not do a little get ready with me for a day of filming while we talk about The Mystery Writer. So The Mystery Writer by Solari Gentile is a story of a woman who was going to law school and she decides to drop out because she's just like, law is just not my vibe. It's not my thing. I'm not digging it. But she really wants to become like an author. The book starts out with her going to her brother's house in Kansas? I think he's in either Kansas or Missouri. I think it is worth noting, because it will come up later, that our main character, oh my god, what's her name? Theo and her brother's name is Gus. Okay, I'm gonna try and keep the name straight because a lot of times I feel like when I'm talking about books, I always kind of forget the name. So I'm always like, this one person or the main female character, and that's just such a mouthful. So Theo, they're both Australian. They grew up on a commune for a potential cult in Australia. But now Theo's brother Gus, short for Augustus, I don't know why I kicked my feet giggling when I found out that Gus's name was Augustus. I was like, I love this. I love this. The story starts out with her going to her brother's and just kind of like tail between the legs. Are you ashamed of me, disappointed of me, embarrassed by me? And he's like, I don't care. I don't care. Do what makes you happy, Theo. And I think one of the main reasons she's kind of like specifically communicating this to her brother is because her brother is a very successful lawyer. So obviously she was going to school to be in the legal field. He's currently in the legal field, and she's just all like, where's the vibes at? And so yeah, everything's good. He's like, you know what? You can just stay with me here while, you get your stuff together and life will be great. It'll be grand. So she does. She decides to stay with her brother and everything's going well. She's, working on her writing. In like chapter 1, I think he pretty much was all like, hey, you can't just be like locked up, stowed away in the house all day. Like, go out, go find somewhere else to work. And so she randomly one day like wanders into, I'm pretty sure it's a bar, because she didn't want to be like, oh, that writer that writes in a coffee shop. She just, starts writing there, and she becomes, a regular. Everyone knows her name, the wait staff, I think it's just the bartender. They all know who she is. And as she spends her days and time working there, she meets this older gentleman. I think it's worth noting that Theo is 22. Pretty sure she's 22. And she meets this older gentleman, and the older gentleman turns out to also be a writer, but he's not just any old writer. He's a well-established, well-known, award-winning. I don't remember. I think the genre he writes is like detective novels, if I recall off the noggin. But she starts to build a relationship with Dan, and obviously the relationship starts out with them talking about writing, talking about work, talking about manuscripts, talking about all of that stuff. And she's just having this really good relationship. And I will note, it was hard for me to dictate like what the timeline of all of this happened. Oh, she had gotten to Gus's place in February, and then events start to happen like the next winter. So she starts to build this relationship with Dan. As she gets to know him more, she starts to grow feelings for him of the romantic variety. And one day, I can't remember why, but they go to his place. I think the day that they go to his place, Theo saw Dan and his agent at Bender's. And at first she was kind of like, ooh, a little jealous. He's sitting there talking to another woman. As the woman's leaving, Dan like goes up to Theo and he's like, oh, so sorry. Why didn't you come say hi? And she's like, oh, you were just talking to this other lady. I didn't want to intrude. And he's like, oh, no worries. She was just my agent. She's like, oh my God, that was your agent? I would love to meet your agent. And he was all like, oh yeah, sure. Maybe someday. But anyways, do you want to like go back to my place? And she was like, yeah, sure. And I don't remember why they went back to his place. But anyways, they go back to his place. and they do the boinkin. It leads to the boinkin. And that's when Thea's like, oh yeah, I think I'm in love with Dan. Her and Dan have a little, macaroni noise session in the house. And then everything's grand. The next day, things seem to be kosher. I can't remember if it's like a few days or a few weeks go by. But next events that occur is they're at Bender's, they're shooting the shit, talking it up. Everything's going great. Theo asks Dan if he would, send her manuscript, because it's done now, to his publishing company. And he's just like, I just don't think Daedalus and Associates is the publishing company. And apparently they are like a huge publishing house. They're like world renowned. You would be a fool not to want to be signed with them. And so she's just like, hey, like, no pressure, but could you please, pretty please, with cherry on top, maybe some macaroni sounds tonight. She didn't offer sex, but I'm just saying, would you please, just send them my manuscript? I don't have to have a meeting, nothing like that. Just send them the manuscript. And he's pretty ambitious, just like, no, not gonna do that. And she is kind of like bummed and buttered. She's like, does he not think I'm a good writer? Does he not like my work? What is the dealio, dude? There was another point I wanted to make. Oh, this whole time, Dan's really liked her writing. It's not like he's not saying no because he thinks it's a shit manuscript. Like, he's really enjoyed it. And then another thing to note is something that will come down the road later on, and something that was noted early in the book, is that Theo was kind of musing one day about how she didn't really know anything about Dan, like his personal life. She's like, he knows so much about me, but I honestly don't really know much about him. So that comes into play. One day she goes to Bender's after, asking him to show his publishing agency the manuscript, him saying no. She goes to Bender's and he's not there. And she's like kind of bummed. She's like, oh man, I was hoping to see him today. So she's like, I'm going to, I don't know, swing by his place, just kind of see what's up, see if he's okay. He's always here. Why isn't he here? So she goes to his place. She sees a black car. I don't remember the exact black car make and model, but she sees a black car sitting out and she's just kind of like, oh, interesting. He must have people over. As she's walking up to his mansion, it's just some random dude comes out and she doesn't really pay much mind to him. She's like, okay, that's who is the owner of the black car. Side story. Throughout all of this storytelling that I've told you thus far, there has been conversations from a conspiracy group. So there's something called the Frankenstein Project, and there's something called Labyrinth, and then there's a bunch of like code names for each person involved with everything. They are of the belief that the lizard people are working on a project, the Frankenstein Project, where they bring humans back to life as zombies. Dan just so happened to be really interested in this. He found forums from this group of people. And that's what he was going to be basing his next novel on. Theo was just kind of like, oh, cool. But he was very into it. You'll have to read the book to really truly understand like this conspiracy theory tie to everything. So back to Dan's house. Theo walks in. All the lights are off. She sees like a cat and she's like, oh, I didn't realize she had a cat. Interesting. Walks in, sees that there's a liquid on the ground, and she's like, oh, maybe the cat like knocked the water bowl over, because the cat was like licking at the liquid. Well, she slips in the liquid, and as she falls, she notices the lower half of Dan laying on the ground, and she's like, oh my goodness, thinking he fell over from the water as well. But obviously he's an older guy, so a fall for him could be a little more detrimental than a 22-year-old. She goes over to him, check on him, be like, Dan, are you okay? She goes to grab at his throat to feel his pulse, but when she grabs at his throat, she realizes there's a giant slash in it. Giant slash. She's freaking out, obviously, but ultimately she ends up calling her brother and letting him know of the situation. And he's like, get the fuck out of there, sit on the entryway, don't touch anything, don't do anything, don't move anything. This is clearly a crime scene. The less your prints are on stuff, the better. Well, obviously, because little Miss Theo stumbled upon a crime scene, she is now being pulled in to be questioned. And Gus, being a lawyer, he's like, well, I'm going to be your lawyer for all this. So lots of things happen. I'm not going to give you a play-by-play, but that's kind of like the first half or the first third of the book. We meet this guy named Mac. Mac is an interesting character, and honestly, I don't know what it is, but all the books that I've been reading lately, I love the male characters. I don't know, maybe people are just writing men great nowadays. Maybe it's the specific authors I'm reading that write fantastic men. But both Gus and Mac, I absolutely love and adore. And we actually spend a large chunk of time with just them later on in the book. But Mac comes from a family of preppers. But he's not about that life. One of the ongoing things is that his mom accidentally shot him one time in his youth, and he's just kind of like, ugh. Anyways, Mac seems to have his head on straight. Mac is what Theo and Gus Teasley call is a private investigator or a private eye. And he's just like, no, that's not what I call myself. I call myself like a researcher or something like that. And then she like one time was like, so you're a when he was trying to like say he wasn't a PI, and she's like, so how he was explaining it, she's like, so you're a hacker? And he's like, no, I'm not a hacker. I'm just a researcher. And she's like, okay. So the ongoing joke throughout the entire thing is that he's a PI. Really wealthy as well. He has a house that is pretty much explained in the sense like we wouldn't be surprised if there was a moat around this house. Things start to go really south after the third murder, and that's when detectives are like, okay, Theo, you are clearly somehow connected to all this. They're thinking Theo is the one who's killing everyone off. And then also there's like evidence that Gus is technically the one who's killing everyone off. They go to arrest Gus, but like literally the same day that they're going to arrest Gus is the day that there is a shootout at his law firm, and Gus is the one who got injured. So he is now in the hospital. Theo is being taken in for questioning, and then all of a sudden this lawyer shows up out of nowhere, because up until this point, Gus and his partner Jackie have been representing Theo during every detective interaction she's ever had. And this new guy shows up. And what I forgot to tell y'all is that Theo ends up meeting with Veronica, who is Dan's agent. And Veronica is very adamant of like, he showed us your manuscript. We absolutely love it. We want you on our team. We have very strict, like, no contact policies. We pretty much maintain your social media accounts, etc. They're very strict, like red flag, red flag, red flag in discussion number one. And I'm like, girl, this is why Dan didn't want you to be associated with Del De Los Associates. I would run, I would hide, but I think she just had rose-colored glasses on and was really excited about the fact that she was talking to an agency, a well-renowned, well-respected agency. And she's like, oh my God, yes, I would do anything to be with you guys. Anyways, this lawyer shows up. After he shows up, Theo disappears. Things went so far south that because of everything that was going on, Gus racked up thousands upon thousands of dollars in medical expenses. Unfortunately, during this time, because of all the commotion around Gus, his law firm let him go. Also, because of the third victim, people assumed it was Gus because of things that were going on in the case. The final victim was a news reporter. Her father decides to, have a little arsenic fun and burn Gus's house down. And also during all that time, because Mac has been helping them out, he was in jail for a while. And then by the time he got out, like obviously he had to work to get his reputation back, but he eventually did. And, again, he's like super wealthy, and he goes to Gus and he's like, listen, buddy, you're down on your luck. I really need a lawyer for like what I do. So come work with me. And Gus initially is just like, no, I'm not going to come work for you. Like, I don't need your sympathy. Like, you're just doing this out of pity. He's like, you're a good friend of mine. We're both in this dump hole together. Just come work with me. And eventually Gus agrees to work with him. We spent a large time of those two trying to not only do normal business, but also they're still looking for Theo. Like, what the heck happened to her? What is going on? This is where I don't know the full timeline. It sounded like it could have been a few months, it could have been a few years. Quite some time passed. I think 3 years. For some reason, 3 years sounds right in my head. 3 years pass and a book comes out. Huge hit. It was initially published in Spanish because the person who is the author is from South America. I don't remember the exact country. It ends up hitting the English market when it is published or translated into English. And worldwide phenomenon. Everyone's obsessed with it. But Mac's mom ends up talking to him about it because she read it and she's like, oh my gosh, talking about like it was so against everything she believes in. And he's just like, oh, interesting. So that's why he decides to read it. And he picks it up and he's reading it one day on the airplane and he starts to recognize it. He starts to recognize it a lot. And there's a certain line in it. Theo said that exact same thing to me one time. What I didn't tell you, Theo and Mac were getting pretty close, and she was like showing him the roadmap for her second manuscript. So she had initially wrote a first manuscript, and her second manuscript, she was just kind of like plotting it all out. And he was over one night that she had like started plotting it all out. So he saw like the plots and the routes and the veins of like what this book was supposed to be. And he's like, this book I'm reading currently by this South American author is the exact same book that I saw plotted out X amount of years ago. They're under the presumption that they stole Theo's work. What they ended up doing after he brought this up to Gus, he's like, Gus, please believe me. This is literally Theo's book. You saw her working on this book. So what they do is they go and sue Daedalus and Associates. So finally, after they opt to sue, we get a perspective from Theo again. She is now in Houston for a book tour because guess what? This worldwide phenomena of a book is her book. And she has been in hiding because Del De Los Associates is like, this is the best thing we can do for you. Send you off to Latin America, put you under pretty much 24-hour watch, and, you know, you'll be alive. And in the background, apparently the company had been like the ones taking care of all of Gus's medical bills. You know, they were the ones who were able to get Mac out of jail. They were doing that in the background to be like, we'll take care of these two guys and you are going to just disappear off the face of the planet. She's going to try and escape. But then she finds out that Gus and Mac are suing them and she's like, no, this ruins everything. It ruins everything. Long story short, we find out that Del De Los and Associates was like this pretty much criminal activity group where it didn't start out that way. They did start out as a genuine publishing house, but they had one incident where one of their authors had killed someone, and so they like, you know, covered it up for and like just incident after incident after incident to the point where literally all of their authors were initially published under one name. They did a terrible act, and then, you know, they made them a new identity, continued publishing their books under a different name. The end all be all is that they were the ones who killed Dan. Yep. After there's a shootout, everyone is like either arrested or killed. Everything seems to be hunky-dory. We end the story with Mac kind of, you know, telling Theo that he likes her more, that he likes her, and they all lived happily ever after. However, the book does end with a chat room post about how there is a sector of the labyrinth in Lawrence, Kansas, where all this has been taking place, and they're going to infiltrate the labyrinth. So it really leaves you on a cliffhanger. That is The Mystery Writer. I don't know if I did a good job at explaining all of it. I tried to leave some details out so that, you know, y'all can go and read it and enjoy it for yourself. But clearly, this was spoiler-filled. So my final thoughts on The Mystery Writer by Solari Gentile is that it was a fun book. It was an enjoyable book. There were some plot choices that I personally was like uninterested in. To be quite frank, the second like Theo goes disappearing, I would say about a third of the way through Mac and Gus's adventures, I was just kind of like, Now it does pick up again. So I would say like the third quarter of the book was when I was just kind of like, let's pick up the pace, y'all. I would have liked to honestly see more insight into the characters involved with the conspiracy theory group. I feel like that just kind of like fell to the wayside, honestly, the last third of the book. So it felt very weird and just disjointed that the book then ended with like a chat room posting stating that this person has like infiltrated the labyrinth. The way the book ended without that was like a happily ever after, you know, a nice little bow tied on top. So maybe the author's intent behind that was to leave you with some sort of like salivating cliffhanger moment, but I feel like that would only truly make sense if there was going to be like a sequel to the book, or maybe not even a sequel to these specific characters, but like another book is going to be written about this labyrinth and Frankenstein project. And who knows, maybe there is. I haven't done any research, but it felt just very disjointed and weird to not have heard from them for so long to then have the book end that way. I hope y'all enjoyed this edition of my Booktober readathon. I don't know what we're calling this. I will see y'all in the next one. Have a great rest of your day. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that already. And yeah, that's all I got. Bye, losers.